All right, let's dive right into our analysis today. We're going to treat one of the most famous letters in history like an ancient artifact just waiting to be decoded. We're looking at the epistle to the Philippians. Now, if you spent any time around this text, you probably know it as the letter of joy. But, when we strip away our modern preconceptions and really dig into the historical dirt it grew out of, a much more intense, high-stakes picture starts to emerge.
Because think about it, the core paradox of Philippians is actually pretty staggering. The author, the Apostle Paul, is chained up in a dark, completely uncertain imprisonment. We're talking late 50s or early 60s AD, and he is facing the very real possibility of a brutal imperial execution. His circumstances are literally as bleak as it gets. His friends are scattered, and rival teachers are actively trying to undermine him while he's locked up and out of the picture. Yet, despite all of that, the letter he dictates radiates this relentless, almost defiant hope and joy. I mean, how exactly do you write an absolute masterpiece on joy from the damp floor of a Roman dungeon?
To figure that out, we're going to look at 4 key areas today. 1. The historical setting. 2. One letter or 3. 3. The core message. And 4. Textual and exegetical history.
So let's kick things off with section 1, the historical setting.
Now, scholars heavily debate Paul's actual location when he penned this text. Was he in Rome, Caesarea, or Ephesus? We know for sure he wrote it to his first European congregation in Philippi, which was a major Roman colony in Macedonia, sometime during the late 50s or early 60s. We also know he was in prison, and he specifically drops a reference to the Praetorian Guard. For centuries, everyone just naturally assumed, okay, he was in Rome, and pinning down the true location actually matters a lot. It completely changes how we understand the immediate danger he was in, the political context of his trial, and the sheer logistical nightmare of getting this letter delivered. But in more recent times, scholars started looking closely at the geography of the ancient Mediterranean and raised some pretty serious questions.
See, the massive distance to Rome is the main sticking point for modern scholars. Because the letter mentions multiple back-and-forth messages, some folks suggest Ephesus as the origin point, just because it's so much closer to Philippi, across the Aegean Sea. The problem? We don't have hard evidence of an Ephesian imprisonment, nor of a Praetorian Guard permanently stationed there. Others point to Caesarea, where Paul was famously imprisoned for 2 solid years. But again, positive evidence tying that specific coastal location to the unique details of this letter is pretty much non-existent. Ultimately, these alternate theories end up relying on a whole lot of heavy speculation.
But here's where it gets really interesting. When you actually map out the timeline of communications, that biggest argument against Rome, the massive distance, kind of turns out to be a pseudo-problem. Even if we use really generous ancient travel times, factoring in walking along Roman roads and sailing across the Adriatic, the rapid sequence of communications we see in the text easily fits within a 4 to 6 month window. Month 1, word of Paul's Roman imprisonment reaches Philippi. By month 2, they dispatch Epaphroditus with financial aid. He arrives, falls gravely ill by month 4, and word of his near-death experience makes it back to Philippi by month 6. This completely neutralizes that distance argument, making the traditional Roman imprisonment highly plausible and firmly rooted in early tradition.
Moving right along to section 2, 1 letter or 3.
Believe it or not, some academics try to chop this document into 3 separate letters. Why? Well, right at the beginning of chapter 3, Paul abruptly shifts his tone, just launching into this severe warning against legalistic teachers. Then he waits all the way until chapter 4 to finally thank the Philippians for the money they sent him. To some modern eyes, this looks like a clumsy editor just stitched 3 different notes together. You know how it is, sometimes scholars just love finding a complex puzzle, even where one might not exist. But I want to show you why that fragmented theory absolutely falls apart under serious textual scrutiny.
When we examine the hard evidence, especially the incredibly ancient P46 papyrus manuscript, which is literally one of our oldest physical collections of Paul's epistles, dating all the way back to the early 3rd or late 2nd century, we see that this document has always been one perfectly unified masterpiece. There is absolutely zero external textual evidence that it ever circulated in fragments, zero. Plus, modern discourse analysis shows these striking verbal parallels, chiastic structures, and a masterful rhetorical flow that weaves the whole thing together from start to finish. And just think about it logically for a second. An editor's job is to smooth things out, right? What later redactor would purposely stitch together a document just to make it more awkward and disjointed? No way! It's clearly one single letter, dictated by a man dealing with a complex web of emotions and urgent pastoral needs in real time.
All right, that brings us to section 3, the core message.
Because of the warm affection Paul shows, it's a really common myth to treat this text as just a happy, casual thank you note. But the fact is, the Philippian church was in absolute crisis. They were facing severe external opposition from their Roman neighbors. Inside the church, beloved and influential leaders like Euodia and Syntyche were caught in bitter disunity. And on top of all that, a dangerous faction of legalizers, who insisted Gentile converts had to adopt strict Jewish ceremonial laws, was actively threatening to infiltrate the congregation. Many believers were understandably losing their confidence. So Paul's famous call to rejoice isn't some fluffy greeting card platitude. It's an act of profound spiritual defiance in the face of brutal, grinding adversity.
To really grasp his survival strategy for them, we have to look at the Greek word phroneo. Now, you might easily miss this in English translations, but Paul uses this exact verb 10 different times in this short letter. It generally translates to think or have an attitude, but it implies a deep, resolute mental determination. Basically, Paul is diagnosing their disunity and fear as a failure of mindset. Surviving their struggles required an intense mental focus and a unified, shared attitude. It's significantly less about how they feel in any given fleeting moment, and far more about how they rigorously train their minds to think. Paul is laying out a hardcore survival strategy here. Right in the middle of the letter, he inserts what scholars call the Carmen Christi, which was likely a beautiful, ancient hymn that the early church actually sang about Christ, voluntarily emptying himself, taking the form of a servant, and eventually being exalted by God. But Paul isn't just giving them an abstract theology lesson, He's giving them a behavioral template. He's saying, emulate that ultimate humility. He urges them to balance this absolute reliance on God's grace with intense human spiritual effort, literally working out their salvation with focus and grit. He even points to his companions Timothy and Epaphroditus as living, breathing examples of this selfless strategy in action.
Which leads us nicely to our final part, Section 4, Textual and Exegetical History.
To truly understand this text today, we have to look through the spectacles of history. Generations of scribes copied these exact words by hand, sometimes making slight errors, sometimes revealing exactly how they interpreted a really tricky phrase, and generations of scholars have wrestled with its meaning. Our primary source for this deep dive, Moises Silva's exhaustive work in the Baker Exegetical Commentary, does a phenomenal job of not just looking at the raw Greek text, but looking at how the absolute giants of history have understood it over the last 2 millennia. And the interpretation of this letter has evolved, layer by beautiful layer. Take John Chrysostom in the 4th century, often known as the Golden Mouthed for his incredible preaching eloquence. His sheer intuition as a native Greek speaker helped capture Paul's linguistic subtleties in a way that modern dictionaries sometimes entirely miss. Skip ahead to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, who practically mastered the art of using the Bible as its own interpreter through incredible, exhaustive cross-referencing. Then you have John Calvin in the 16th century, bringing Renaissance humanism and a surprisingly amazing restraint to the text, totally avoiding the trap of forcing an external theological system onto Paul's plain words. And in the 19th century, J.B. Lightfoot reminded the academic world that the ultimate substance of this letter wasn't just a rigid dogmatic code, but a living person and a dynamic life. Every generation unlocks a new, vital dimension of the text.
As we close out our investigation today, I want to leave you with this final thought. The original Philippians read this letter through the lens of Roman persecution, intense internal church drama, and deep financial anxiety. Every scholar since has read it through the lens of their own era. So what about you? How are your modern assumptions, your everyday comforts, or your current anxieties coloring the way you read this ancient call to fierce, determined joy? Are you reading it as a comfortable modern greeting card, or as the ancient survival manual it was truly meant to be? Think about that next time you crack open this masterpiece. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.